On today's episode of the Ag Irrigation Collective, we're going to take a question from Reddit. Stick around. Hi, I'm Wes Schaefer, your host with the Ag Irrigation Collective. Sure appreciate you stopping by today. We've actually had a question or two come in on Reddit. I wanted to address a few things. We've got user Into the Shadows 99. That's actually a group of high school students using that account, doing some research on some agricultural irrigation practices, and we're going to address this, and I'll send this link over to them so they can work on their project and be more well informed. Their first question was, what equipment is currently on the market for moisture detecting in soil? Well, Into the Shadows 99, I'll tell you, there is a lot of moisture sensors that are on the market. There's several brands. Irritech sells one, Centec sells one. There are several moisture probe models and brands out on the market currently. So, by way of the actual probe in the ground, they are plentiful. You can get them in varied lengths. Typically, they come in either millimeter or centimeter measurements. Um, as far as that goes, typically the equipment to read those, there are multiple offerings of companies. One that I deal directly with is called AgSense or Valley 365, which is one and the same anymore. And it has a system that runs with a Verizon or AT&T modem card that gives each unit capability to be able to shoot a signal to the cloud, and then of course through an app on your phone you're able to retrieve that, and depending on what system you use, you are able to then compile reports of various places in the field and which field those are in. What typically there you'll put in info as far as what soil type you're running, the crop you're utilizing, put in your area you're at. A lot of times they'll take NRCS or university data for that to be able to make recommendations based on irrigation scheduling that we use moisture detecting for. Um, we're seeing a lot of that scheduling right now of having some piece of software that in the case that I'm referring to is called Valley Scheduling. And what that does is takes all the ET rates based on local weather stations. It takes all sorts of different parameters, soil types, crop type, and it says, okay, you're at 70% capacity. You need to irrigate this much to get back to 100% capacity. And of course, when there is a rain event, that goes into that equation by two ways. One, then the soil is recharged, as well as if you do have a rain bucket on the system, then it shows you that on that same system, you can have a local weather station that you can set up that does have a rain bucket, has a wind meter, humidity, all sorts of detecting stuff that goes into that equation. So there's that one product. There are multiple other products. You can find any pivot manufacturer. They are putting them out. There's a lot of additional folks that are putting out stuff like that. So that is available, and I hope you can go on your search that way. That'd be good. You've got two other questions I'll address in this same podcast here. What gap do I think needs to be addressed? Um, Assuming you're talking about moisture detection in soil, I really haven't found a lot of gaps. The major thing where I'm at in the state of Utah is the soils, even in one field, can vary so greatly that the recommendation from some of these manufacturers that are putting out this software to do scheduling recommends only one or two probes per 120 acre field. And I think if there can be a way to detect additional places within that field for a reasonable price, and I think that's the biggest thing, is the reasonable price on it is probably the biggest deal. And but currently the bulk of them are only recommending that you find a representative place in the field, which typically on a pivot field would be between maybe the fourth and the sixth span of the pivot, somewhere in that neighborhood, and not on a high spot and not on a low spot, but on a good representation of the field. And they're taking some pretty good averages on that. Now, when you throw 40 moisture probes out in the field, does it do you much more good? I don't know. And I think that's where part of the disconnect is with that is, and I guess I don't fully know if some of these folks that are putting this software together have tested one moisture probe as opposed to 40, as opposed to 150, as opposed to 300. Say you do one per acre and you put 120 probes out there. Is that sufficient? Does it give the same or close enough to the same info as you get with one probe in a representative area? I don't know. So maybe that could be tested if it hasn't been done, or at least some research done to learn if that's been done. But as far as moisture testing and moisture probes in the ground, what needs to be addressed, I don't really have a great answer for that, other than you could do a little research into what already has been tested to see if one is actually acceptable for the data to be collected. Because you've got to remember, too, we're not in a laboratory environment. We're out in the field. We're dealing with environmental impacts such as weather, what fertilizer's getting put on, what kind of rodents we're dealing with, what kind of livestock we're dealing with potentially in the field, what kind of wildlife we're dealing with in the field. There's a lot of outside factors that play into all of that. So that's something to take a look at. Sorry, I couldn't really answer that question in great detail. Third question you've got are, what applications do drones play in agriculture? Is this something that you believe will be used by farmers? Actually, it is quite heavily used and becoming more and more popular. There are several applications. The first one will bounce back to the moisture detecting and kind of some crop growth applications where it's used as some NDVI maps. And what those are similar to an infrared type of map, and they fly the drone over top of fields. You'll see a lot of crop advisors, a lot of irrigation consultants, a lot of agronomists that are doing this very thing. And they are sending these drones out over top of, let's call it 120 acre pivot, and it's sending these maps back to in real time to their cell phones, and they're able to take a look at these maps and learn where moisture is higher or lower. They learn where the vegetation is thicker or thinner. They can start detecting some weed activity. It's pretty neat what are being done with drones. In other applications in agriculture that drones are being used, and it's even in the last, I'm going to call it 18 months. It's probably longer than that in certain areas, but I've been seeing a very heavy uptick in drone spraying applications as well as drone dry fertilizer applications and seeding applications. There are several folks local here that are spraying crops with drones. They're seeding rangeland on top of sagebrush with drones. A whole pile. I know that the two guys that I'm very familiar with that got into drones recently, they're these gigantic, I believe it's a T50 and a T40 DJI drone. And they started with one drone, and it wasn't maybe a month and a half that both of them had a second drone. They got so busy. And so drones are being used by farmers. There's several farmers local here that own their own large drones for spraying as well as small drones to do some of this crop application out in the field. So it is very heavily looked at. One website I've taken a look at is DJI Agriculture. Of course, they started overseas from the United States and is very heavy testing that they've already done. And finally here, probably in the last, I'm going to say 3 to 5 years, it came to the United States. It could be 10 years. I don't exactly know. But within the last 18 months from right now, which is about mid-November 2024, that drones have really, really started to become a staple on a lot of farms. Small farms, not necessarily so much, only for the fact that they can't justify having a drone unless they consider it more of a luxury item, if you'd call it that. And so, anyway, I think drones do have their place in agriculture, and I do believe you give it another 2 years and all farmers will be fully accepting of drones. There's such a neat wow factor to them that I think guys, even if you can get your 80-year-old farmer and they just think it's the neatest thing ever. So technology on farms is resisted by some, but overall, I think you see some of these guys that see the benefit of it, and they're not holding back. So I hope that addressed your questions probably as good as I can, and I'll send this video over to you. All you podcast and YouTube listeners, I sure appreciate you tuning in. That's going to shut us down for the day. Be profitable, my friends. We'll catch you on down the road.